The UK can shut down your internet instantly. What if, right now, your internet stopped working? Not slowly, not glitching, just gone. Your Wi-Fi still shows full bars. Your signal looks normal, but nothing loads. You open WhatsApp, messages won't send. You try Google, it just spins. Your banking app, offline, maps, dead. At first you think it's your router, so you restart it, still nothing. Then you check your phone, same problem. Then your laptop, same thing. And then it hits you. It's not your device, it's everything. Now here's the part most people don't realize. In the UK, this situation is not impossible. In fact, there are legal powers that could allow it to happen. No announcement, no vote, no warning, just silence. And the reason this is possible comes down to something most people have never read. The Civil Contingencies Act 2004. Now, on the surface, this law sounds reasonable. It was created to deal with extreme situations, things like war, terror attacks, pandemics, major disasters, moments where the government needs to act quickly, decisively, without delays. And at first glance, that makes sense. But when you look deeper, you start to see how much power it actually gives. Because this law doesn't just allow action, it allows control. Control over infrastructure, control over movement, control over information, and most importantly, control over communication systems, including the internet. Now here's where it gets interesting. The law doesn't say, shut down the internet. It doesn't need to, because instead, it gives the government the power to direct companies, to issue emergency regulations, to override normal processes, and to require cooperation. And that's the key, because the internet isn't some abstract thing floating in space. It's built on physical systems, owned and operated by companies like BT, Virgin Media, Sky, Vodafone, EE. All of them form part of the UK's digital backbone, and under emergency powers, those companies can be instructed, legally, to take action. Now think about what that means. If you control the companies, you control the network, and if you control the network, you control access. Now let's pause for a second, because this is where most people ask the wrong question. They ask, would the UK ever shut down the internet? But that's not the right question. The real question is, under what circumstances could they justify it? Because the definition of an emergency is not as narrow as people think. It includes things like serious damage to human welfare, threats to public safety, disruption to communication systems, economic instability. And those categories are incredibly broad enough that in the right situation, restrictions on internet access could be framed as necessary. Not extreme, not authoritarian, but protective. Now, to understand how realistic this is, we need to look at what's already happened around the world, because this isn't theoretical. It's been done before. In 2011, Egypt, during mass protests, the government ordered internet service providers to disconnect, and within hours, the country went dark. Millions of people offline. No coordination, no communication, no way to verify information, just blackout. Then there's India, the world leader in internet shutdowns, not nationwide, but localized. Entire regions cut off, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. Then Iran, during periods of unrest, internet access restricted, slowed, or completely blocked. Information flow controlled. And then Russia, which has been building something even more advanced, a sovereign internet, a system designed to operate independently, to isolate itself if needed, to control what comes in and what goes out. Now the UK is not those countries. The systems are different, the governance is different, the transparency is different, but the underlying capability, that's where things get interesting, because the UK already has deep integration between government and telecom infrastructure. Organizations like Ofcom regulate communications, GCHQ handles signals intelligence. The National Cybersecurity Centre works directly with critical infrastructure providers, and the Home Office oversees security and emergency response. These aren't disconnected entities, they already coordinate, they already communicate, they already have influence, and telecom companies are not independent in the way people assume. They operate under licenses, under regulations, under legal obligations, which means in certain situations they don't get to choose, they have to comply. Now let's talk about how an internet shutdown wouldn't look like what you expect. Because most people imagine something dramatic, a message, a warning, a clear signal. But in reality, it would likely be much more subtle. There are multiple ways to restrict internet access without ever saying the words shutdown. One method is DNS blocking. This means when you type a website, it simply doesn't resolve. It's like the address no longer exists. Another method is IP blocking, where specific servers become unreachable. Then there's throttling, where the internet isn't turned off. It's just slowed down so much, it becomes unusable. Pages don't load, videos don't play, apps fail silently. And then there's mobile network control, where 4G or 5G access is restricted in certain areas, not everywhere, just where it matters. And perhaps the most effective method of all is what's called a silent failure, where everything appears normal, but nothing works, no announcement, no explanation, just confusion. Now think about how people would react. At first, they'd assume it's a technical issue, then a provider issue, then maybe a regional outage. But without internet, they wouldn't be able to check, they wouldn't be able to confirm, they wouldn't be able to coordinate, and that's where the real impact begins. Because we rely on the internet for almost everything. Communication, navigation, payments, work, news. Without it, modern life doesn't just slow down, it fragments. People lose access to information, they lose access to services, they lose access to each other, and in that environment, control becomes easier. Now, to be clear, there are arguments for why governments want this capability. From a security perspective, it can prevent coordination during violent unrest. It can limit the spread of harmful misinformation. It can protect critical infrastructure. It can buy time. But at the same time, it concentrates power because whoever controls access to information controls perception, controls coordination, and to some extent controls reality. Which brings us to the most important question, not whether it's possible, not whether it's legal, but who decides when it's used, who defines the emergency, who sets the limits, and who decides when things go back to normal. Because once a system like this exists, it doesn't need to be used often, it just needs to be possible. And once you understand that, you start to see the internet differently. Not as something permanent, not as something guaranteed, but as something that can be controlled, restricted, or removed. If the situation is deemed serious enough, and if that moment ever comes, it won't feel like a dramatic event. There won't be a countdown, there won't be a warning, it will just happen. Quietly, instantly. And most people won't understand what's going on until it's already too late.